page. There we go.
Okay, great.
Mr. Lynn, we're muted.
Hello, good night. Welcome to this Legalized program, this 20th day of October 2024. Yesterday, 19 October, marked 41 years since the tragic and unprecedented events which presaged the U.S. invasion of Grenada that brought an end to the 4.5 years revolutionary experiment. One of the main objectives of this program is to expose viewers and followers to the structured legal framework which exists for resolving conflicts that would inevitably arise in any society. Understanding of the legal tapestry for rights, obligations, and procedures available for protecting and enforcing rights can greatly assist in managing conflicts and avoiding the escalation and tragic consequences. We are not discussing October 1983 tonight, but it is fitting that we pay respects to all those who perished both on October 19th and in the subsequent invasion in 1983, and I so do. Given that the society we live in will be owned and governed someday in the not too distant future by those who are now children, it is fitting that tonight's discussion on the Child Protection and Adoption Act and the welfare of children is taking place at this time, when events, the repeat of which we do not ever wish for Grenada or the Caribbean, are being commemorated, and also when International Month of the Child is being celebrated. Tonight we have with us Lady Annade Trotman-Joseph, an attorney at law and advocate for children rights, and Mrs. Joseph-John, a children rights practitioner, being the supervisor of the Child Protection Authority Alternative Care Unit. I just want to thank the sponsors of this program, Child Professional Solutions, Gem FM Broadcasting out of Canada, and GTAL, before I introduce the guests.
Attention all workers, your health and safety at work are critical. At Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, we are dedicated to ensuring you have a safe and secure work environment. If you encounter unsafe conditions or are involved in an accident, take immediate actions. Report it to the company, your shop steward, and make sure it reaches your union. Your health and safety is a priority, and a strong union means a strong voice for your rights. Don't wait. Address concerns right away and protect your well-being. For a safer workplace and a better quality of life, stand with the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. Together, we can create a safer, healthier work environment for everyone.
Good night, Mistress Joseph-John. Good night, Lady Trotman-Joseph.
Good night, and thank you, Mr. Layne, for having us on your program.
Well, maybe Miss Joseph-John.
Good night to you, Mr. Layne, and likewise to you, Mrs. Joseph.
Same to you.
Thank you for
You
having
sound
us.
a little father. You are somewhere a little far.
I'm not too sure.
Okay, you sound much better now.
Are you hearing me better now?
Very much better. I am hearing you, and I
Okay,
hope
all right. I think I need
yes,
to.
yes. Great, nice. Well, this is a big topic tonight, as it is clear from, it should be clear to anyone. The Child Protection Authority, as you know, that's there's an act which sets out the framework for ensuring protection of children and for regulating how matters are to be dealt with, handled, whatever issues of protection arise. Mistress Joseph-John, you work in the field, so I don't know, I'll ask you to give any introductory remarks.
The Child Protection Authority, as you rightfully indicated, we are governed or mandated by the Child Protection and Adoption Act of 2010. The Act gives us the right basically to carry out our work efficiently. Just to sum a little bit as to what the Act entails, it speaks both on adoption, it speaks on fostering, and it also speaks on the investigative part of the job that we do, right? CPA basically is divided into more or less two sections, right? The aspect of placing the children and then the investigative part. So the act in itself, it provides that leeway for us so that we can complete our work effectively.
Lady Joseph, as a former member of the board, as an activist in the area, and as an attorney, I invite you to give some introductory remarks.
Okay, so thank you. So yes, I am a social rights activist in addition to all that I do legally, but it is because I am a lawyer that this brought me to my advocacy and passion about child rights. And those who know me know I'm very passionate about this area, even though I am more known as a gender rights advocate. But I have chaired the Grenada National Coalition on the Rights of a Child for over 5 years. I've been a consultant, including an in-house consultant with UNICEF, which is the UN body that oversees the implementation and the monitoring of the rights of the child worldwide. And I just want to say that Grenada has been a signatory of the Convention on the Rights of the Child since November 1990. So me being a lawyer and becoming involved in child rights here, I have not only represented young people pro bono, usually in the magistrate's court, where they have been in conflict with the law, or I've also professionally represented persons who are seeking custody, always putting the best interests of the child before everything else, because this is the ultimate test now, because we have ratified or agreed the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And in addition to all of that, I have hit the road with my fellow child rights advocates on many an occasion, marching through the streets of St. George's with placards, also during Constitution reform some years ago, again going out, looking towards ensuring that Grenadians understand why children, especially and other vulnerable groups, need to have their rights perhaps enshrined, accepted not only in law, but in the Constitution, but they need greater care because children especially are the most vulnerable of our society. So that's my involvement and what brought me to this involvement with children.
Okay, so let me just take it from the top. What's the basic definition when we speak about child rights, child protection? Who are we speaking about?
Well, legally speaking, I am pausing. I was allowing my colleague to go, but I would say, legally speaking, according to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, as well as the laws of Grenada, many of our laws relating to family as well, a child is any person. And I want us to remember that children are human beings too. They are persons, they have rights, because lots of other persons in our society, in our country, in our region, in the world, seem to think that because children are little, they're weaker, they're physically not able to do as quickly as adults, that they have no rights. But any person between 0, that is a baby, to the age of 18, is considered by international law and our local law to be a child. Of course, some of our teenagers and adolescents don't want to hear that at just going on 18, they're children, but that is the definition. And there are reasons for this.
In our societies, and by our societies, I mean Caribbean societies in general, and maybe all societies in this modern era, the family is the basic structure, the basic cellular structure of the society. And the belief is that it is just natural for in particular a mother to have that love and affection for a child and want to protect the child. What then it would justify the state through the Child Protection Act? What would justify the state to intervene in that process of caring and for children, which is the primary function of parents and in particular the mothers in our society? Ms. John,
Yes, as indicated, you said the general idea basically is for parents to care and protect. It's a general idea, but the truth and the fact is, at some time it's not realistic. It doesn't happen. We have numerous occasions where we have parents putting their children at risk, or parents actually causing or imposing harm to their children. And so as a result of that, the Act gave us that provision, right? It speaks of the fact that if a child is being abused, or if there's a suspicion of abuse of a child, then we are given the authority to intervene. And the Act basically would give us that leeway to intervene, because it's what it should be. Parents should care, parents should protect, but some of the times we don't have that from our parents. We find parents in themselves imposing abuse or harm to their children.
And what you would consider as abuse or harm in this context? Because, for example, and I'm being just devil's advocate here. For example, we grew up in a society where it is said that you spare the rod, you lose the child. We believe in disciplining in those kind of ways. So I'm just asking, what will be in the context of the law considered to be abuse, causing harm, not caring for a child?
According to the CRC, Child Protection and Adoption Act, and Adoption Act of 2010, we do not sanction any form of corporal punishment. And we have seen that persons, the intention might be pure in disciplining the children, but at the end of the day, we often find, or we often observe, that the children in themselves are being severely harmed. I mean, I could give you numerous occasions or examples as to what I'm speaking of without breaching confidentiality. Let's say, for instance, we had instances where maybe a child might take something that he or she knows that he shouldn't, and a form of discipline. Mom might say, "I would give you some belts," and at the end of the day, when that mom finished with the child, you see marks all over the child's skin. I mean, literally skin missing from the child's body. You have instances where children are being burned for taking stuff because the hands are the one that does stealing. I mean, all these things are form of abuse, and one would say pure, I'm genuine in caring, or I'm trying to teach my child what is right from what is wrong. But truth be told, in the process of doing that, you are creating harm to that child. And as Mrs. Joseph indicated earlier, though the children might be small and one might think that they don't have a voice, but truth of the fact is they do have a voice. And we should consider them because they have rights as well. Yeah?
Yes. Lady Annade?
Yes, if I may come in here as an advocate, very often I would have been speaking with adults, parents, and other interested persons, and we have explained to them, or I would have explained to them, that these children have rights. And sometimes they get very angry. Well, I have a right to beat my child, I have a right to discipline my child. And indeed, when we are talking about family units, we're talking about every different group that would make up our society. We accept, as persons who are advocating for human rights, that everybody's rights should be respected. But along with the rights come responsibilities. And the Convention on the Rights of the Child also recognizes parents and guardians' responsibilities, but they also accept that they have rights and duties as well. But what I want to perhaps expound or share about a little more, based on what Mrs. John would have said, is that in law there is what you call crossing the line. It is one thing to raise a rod at a child in discipline, but it is quite another thing where it becomes criminal. And parents need to remember this. You can smack a child, you can give the child a slap in the hand, or whatever. But when you begin to welt a child, cause a child to bleed, cause a child to be burnt, have third degree, second degree, first degree burns, you have crossed a line from being disciplining that child to being or carrying out a criminal act against a small, vulnerable, helpless human being. And the law, not just this Child Protection Act, but the criminal law will also have a law, a section for that, but it will also carry a penalty, which could also involve jail time. And I think adults, parents, guardians, sometimes teachers, they have to remember that there's discipline, but there's also a criminal act that can be committed against a child. And I think if people try their best not to beat children in anger, which is different from discipline, and sometimes understand that there are other areas that you can utilize or use for disciplining a child. Perhaps, withholding a particular snack. Again, you don't want to be cruel to a child, but yes, sometimes there must be boundaries. There must be accountability that children have to learn. Because if they don't learn it as children, well, then we have some adults who really and truly have no accountability and discipline in their lives when it relates to their spouses, their own children, and everybody else that they come into contact with in society.
If I may point out, the Child Protection Act, Section 25, Child Protection and Adoption Act, it says a child is in need of care and protection where the child, A, has suffered from harm or is likely to suffer harm caused by neglect of the child, the failure of the parent to adequately supervise or protect the child, or the failure of the parent to provide for the adequate supervision or protection of the child. There are others, but I just want to focus on those. And let me just posit a scenario. If a parent leaves a child at home, let's say the child is 16-year-old, the parent leaves a 16-year-old together with a 5-year-old to basically to care for that 5-year-old while they go off to work or go off to some entertainment, something as that. Would that be in violation of their obligation under the Act A, and B, would that justify intervention by the CPA?
It's not a black and white answer to this question, because there are a number of factors we need to take into consideration. First, we need to think of what is the cognitive ability of that 16-year-old. 16-year-old could be a 16-year-old but not functioning as a 16-year-old. Also, you have to take into consideration the ability of that 16-year-old as well. And also whether or not mom would leave what is adequate for the children, and so that the 16-year-old would be able to assist with the 5-year-old within that home. So it's not saying right off the bat, if the 16-year-old is left with a 5-year-old, then it's neglect. As I indicated, there's a lot of things that we need to take into consideration.
I would add again, it may have to do with the maturity of the 16-year-old. And when you start now to talk about adolescents and infants, if that 16-year-old, for example, waits for the parent to go out, puts the child to bed, and then slips out with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, these are some of the kinds of considerations that a parent should take into account before leaving children behind, because a 16-year-old, yes, is still a child. I would say perhaps you would have to ask the neighbor as well to keep an eye, but everything has to be considered, because if something goes wrong, somebody may be held responsible, and that may be the parent. Our criminal code, if I'm not mistaken, I know we're not discussing the criminal code, but it speaks in some cases to instances where children are left unattended. And if, let's say, for example, the 16-year-old slips out, leaving the 5-year-old alone, and the 5-year-old sets the house on fire, which we know has happened, then we know as well that it is the parent who ultimately will be held responsible, not only in terms of this particular Child Protection Act, but by the criminal code and the criminal laws. And again, as I said before, there will be penalties, there will be a price to pay in law or by law for leaving or neglecting small children without taking everything into consideration.
Mr. John, the Act also speaks of emotional abuse. And I guess, and it says, it refers to emotional abuse as, as for the purpose of this Act, emotional abuse exists where a child has suffered or is suffering or is likely to suffer in a way that has caused, is causing, or is likely to cause significant harm to his well-being or development, or is being or is likely to be exposed to domestic violence in accordance with existing law. Now, some may say that it's very difficult to measure that. What specific acts you will regard as acts of emotional abuse against a child? Calling the child name.
What you have pinpointed.
Sorry, go ahead.
Could you repeat? I didn't hear the last thing you said.
I was saying, for example, calling the child name.
Right, so that too can be a factor. And as you also indicated, being exposed to domestic violence, or even the mere fact of mom or dad not providing psychological support for that child also can be form of emotional abuse. Yes, of course, relating to the child as dumb and stupid, all the ill names or factors as well.
And what will amount to not providing emotional, psychological support, as you said? Things as what, sir?
Just repeat for me.
Things as what would amount to not providing psychological support?
You're breaking up. You're breaking
So,
up.
yes, yes. My question was, you mentioned not providing psychological support. And I was asking concretely,
Right.
what would amount to that? Not providing
Mhm.
psychological support. Just examples from your own work, without calling any names or disclosing any confidences.
Well, it could be the simplest of things. Child needs supports in school. Mom and dad are not there to assist with that form of help for that child, or maybe the child has been going through something really tough. And one might relate to mom or dad, and instead of giving a sound, solid advice, mom would shun him or her, or relate to them as stupid. Why didn't you do this? Because I taught you better. I think you should have more sense to know that not to do that. You're so silly. Those and it can be for the simplest things, as I indicated.
Okay. Lady Joseph.
Yes. Yes, for me, emotional abuse, and even within the definition of the Domestic Violence Act, it can mean many things. But I think the most obvious to a child is when you are disempowering of a child. You call them ugly. You say you wish that they had never been born, you had never made them. These kinds of horrible statements to a child cause the kind of mental trauma and scarring that will go with them throughout their entire life cycle. And I think that sometimes people feel that maybe because a child is not physically harmed, that they are not harmed. But sometimes you will come across a child who is more harmed through emotional abuse, which sometimes also includes financial abuse. Some parents who have the means, but they're just not giving the child enough to be able to perhaps go get to the furthest point towards their school and make them, walk excessively. Although long ago this used to seem quite normal, but now, we have to take everything within reason. Um, and we're not talking of a situation where the family just can't afford it or a parent can't afford it, but we're talking where it can be done, where they can be supported, and it's not being done, and it's being not done with cruelty. So this is the kind of area that we need to look at when we're talking um, trauma, this emotional and harmful trauma that a child may experience. Again, with discipline, I remember growing up hearing about parents dressing children to go to a birthday party. And just before the child who is dressed with a brand new dress, brand new shoes, brand new ribbons, let's say, they are told they're not going, but not only they are told they're not going, but they're put under the shower with running water, and then said they're told, sorry, to take off their clothes and whatever they have on and get back into bed. They're not going anywhere. Now, this is the kind of emotional harm that I believe that the act speaks to. And this is just an example, but I'm sure that in real terms, Mrs. John can speak again to some of what she would be experiencing in terms of counseling children who have been harmed in this manner.
And I think the emotional abuse aspect of it is one that is heavily overlooked by many. There's an old saying, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words cannot hurt me." And in truth and in fact, I believe at times words are more harmful than the actual impact of a lash itself. We often overlook it because some of the times we don't physically see the trauma of the children, but I think that we need to pay more attention, to the simplest signs. Sometimes persons would be withdrawn to themselves. If they were outgoing or outspoken persons, they would withdraw. Those things. We need to pay more attention to our children because I think it's something that is often overlooked.
Uh, how much in your work and work of the Child Protection Authority, how much resistance do you meet from parents in cases where the authority decides to intervene? on the basis that the parent is neglecting the child or abusing the child, etc.?
Well, almost, if not all of the times, we undergo resistance because in their eyes, it's their right to discipline their child or their children. And who are you to say how I should not discipline my child? And so they often put up a front from the get-go. Um, and though sometimes the abuse is clear as they're so visible, they themselves, it's nothing to them because it's just what they do and how they see or how they perceive is the best way to discipline their children. But we oftentimes undergo resistance from the parents, 99% of the times. As long as the parents are the perpetrators, we often get resistance.
Okay. Lady Annade?
Yes, I think this is an area that should always be under review by Child Protection Authority personnel in particular, and persons who work in this area of child protection. Because I believe, and I have been myself representing the GNCRC, the National Coalition on the Rights of the Child. I have been on the board of the predecessor of this Child Protection Authority, the Child Welfare Authority, and we at that time prepared for this handover to this new entity. And I believe, really and truly, based on my experience as a lawyer, as an activist, as someone who has represented children and who know of cases where children have been taken away. I've seen parents crying and distressed. And I believe that this particular right or removal of children from their families by the Child Protection Authority should really only be used on an emergency basis. The law is very clear that it has to also be in the best interest of the child. In my experience, I have found that sometimes child protection, and I'm not speaking to any one person, just generally over time, not only here in Grenada, but across the Caribbean, that a child protection authority personnel is usually very urgent about having this child removed. But I think that every care and consideration should be taken before making that move, including going in to have intervention with the families themselves, perhaps where I would say child sexual abuse is not perhaps the cause for removing the child. And I say this because from experience, what sometimes has happened to children, I myself have been part of a legal system that helped child protection authorities, not only here, but in other countries in the region, to remove children. And I have lived to see those children end up worse off, having been removed from the home, especially where there was no view of reuniting their family, which is the basic unit of the society, without the counseling to try and mend things together, bring the families together where, for example, criminal charges are not laid, but to work by counseling the family unit and perhaps even the community and elders within the community to support that family. These children end up way worse and become abused very often by predators and pedophiles within even sometimes the care protection system. So I would have to say and to caution always that this should really, really be the very last resort. That is the removal of children from their families without first trying for the very best interest of the children and for their long-term interest, going towards, of course, adolescence and adulthood, to ensure that everything within the power of the authority would have been done to avert removing them from the home, and in some cases, especially permanently from their home.
And I agree with you 100%. There's actually a process for the listening public, there's a process of removal. Actually, there are times when the authority would have to do immediate removal without any intervention being done. For instance, let's say Carnival and a mother decides to leave her 1-year-old, 2-year-old home alone, and we get a call. It's wee hours of the morning, 1, 2 in the morning. There's a child home alone. She's screaming. There's no one to help. We will need to step in and do a removal because there's no one basically to assist. So there are times when we would have to do immediate removal without any intervention. That's just a typical example. However, what usually would happen is we would work with the family, right? The Child Protection Authority is divided into subgroups. So we have the investigative team, we have the family support team, we have courts, we have alternative care, right? So the investigative team, that unit is responsible for investigating a case. If there are any psychosocial issues within that family, then that case would be referred to the family support unit. And there they would work with the family, whatever intervention that is needed. Let's say one would need parenting classes or man-to-man program, counseling, what have you. They would be referred to the different entities for assistance. However, there's a period, right, in which we would work with the family, 6 months a year period. If within that period we notice or observe that the family is not making any strides, yes, they're getting the support, yes, they're being referred, they're not attending to the classes, they're not taking the call, they're not, whatever the issues are, we're still seeing it existing within that 6 months a year period, then we have no choice because our mandate is to do what is best for the children. So now we would definitely need to do a removal in the best interest of the child. And then after the child has been removed, then we will look resort to family member, because we wouldn't just take them and place them with strangers or residential home. We would always turn to family members to see whether or not, if there's anyone within that circle that might be able to assist in the care and protection of that child. If there's no one within the family circle, then and only then we would resort to fostering or residential home. But there's a process of removal. We will work with the family, and if within that stipulated time, again, as I said, we are looking at what is best for the child, then and only then we will do the removal.
Yes. Someone posted a comment and a question here. It said, I believe that the Child Protection Authority is a small unit. The question is, how does the unit monitor this sort of behavior throughout the state of Grenada? I think he's talking about abuse, neglect, and so on. So
we are heavily dependent on the public, right? Because without the public, then we would not know exactly what is happening. So the public, they would do a referral. When the referral comes in, then as I indicated, we have the different units that is responsible for different aspects of the case. And that is how we would do our monitoring. So if it's one that warrants us to place the child within state care, then the alternative care would work with that child and do our follow-ups, whether it be through school, the clinic, the home itself, community, to see how best we can work with the child. And even then, if it's not a criminal matter, even then, when the child is within state care, we would still try to work with the parents, because our ultimate goal is reunification. However, it depends on the circumstance of the case. Then and only then we would have to resort to alternative arrangements for the child. But we are heavily dependent on the public.
Okay, and the law in fact provides for mandatory reporting. There are some people who must report.
Reporting.
So, for example, if you go to a doctor, a dentist,
yes,
administrator of hospital, social worker, if they observe anything, then they are obligated to report. But you know,
just before you go further, I think this is a very important area, because for children who are being abused in any form that we can describe, very often the main place that, or a few main places where it can be observed that a child is being abused would be school, because right away, a teacher who's observant, a caring teacher, well trained, would realize that a child who has been a very happy child, for example, is suddenly changing, their behavior is changing, they're becoming aggressive to their fellow students, and there'll be other behavioral changes. They'll start to drop in their grades and so on. So I think it should always be reinforced to teachers that there should be mandatory reporting. And of course, as Mrs. John said, there are ways that, investigations are carried out and so on. But again, after school, which is where a child may spend sometimes even more waking time than being at home or being supervised at home, very often another place where mandatory reporting should really be observed should be our medical care areas, our hospitals in particular, our medical centers where children should have to go to get their vaccinations when they're younger. Perhaps a little more time should be taken by nurses and doctors to just, examine them to ensure that they're not being physically assaulted or displaying any other signs. Medical doctors, these are the main areas where it can be seen more readily that there is evidence of abuse. And that is why this area of mandatory reporting is so, so important. And just sharing as an advocate, there have been many times where I've gone on radio programs, television programs to speak about child rights and child protection. And in the off time, while we cut away to ads and so on, calls would start coming into the studio where persons would start raising complaints about their neighbors or saying that we have reported to the Child Protection Authority or to the Ministry of Social Development. And these situations are just going on unabated. Nobody is coming in or stepping in to help this child, even though the reports are being made. Again, what do you do? I, for example, would go and lodge that report again, but how are we so sure that the follow-up is being done? Do we have the data coming out of the Child Protection Authority? Do we have the data coming out of the Community Policing Department? So, these are some of the issues perhaps that we can also discuss coming out from the representative of the Child Protection Authority this evening.
Yes. And in fact, just to note that in cases where mandatory reporting is required, it is actually an offense not to do so in a timely manner. That's how strong the lawmakers take it, but I don't know how much compliance we have in that area. The other concern I just want to raise, how astute to the investigators, how aware are your investigators, of the possibility of mischief being made in terms of reports and so for whatever purpose. Maybe neighbors having problems, maybe father and a mother having problems and looking to make reports. Basically, using the child, the children as pawns in a bigger portion. Are your investigators trained in terms of that aspect?
Yes. And just to add with what Mrs. Joseph indicated, right? Reports would come into the authority, and some persons might say, well, yes, I reported and nothing was done. The thing is, we cannot call the referrer and said, we are on the case now, we're doing X, we're doing Y, right? You would not know what is being done because we are bound by confidentiality and we work with the family. So though one might think or one might recommend and need a child to remove immediately because they're seeing X, Y, and Z. Remember, our mandate is what is best for the child. And to remove the child from his or her home also would affect the child. So we would have to first work with the family before that child could be removed, right? Or if at all that child should be removed, right? And many of times we have persons maliciously making reports on persons because, as you rightfully say, we have a disgruntled neighbor, or mother and father has custody issues and one wants to build a case against the other, and so they would report maliciously. And so investigation would have to be carried out, and the investigation in itself would take time. On a weekly basis, we usually would get approximately 20 cases per district a week. And you're speaking of, we have approximately.
Hold on. You said
uh,
that's nationally?
Pardon?
You get 20 cases per week nationally?
Yes, per district, on average, right? And sometimes a little less, could be a little more, but on average, roughly, right, on a weekly basis, right? And it's per district, right?
How much districts you have?
And we have, well, the St. George's branch and the St. Andrews branch. St. George's comprises of St. Max, St. John's, and St. George's, and St. Andrews comprises of St. David, St. Andrews, St. Patrick's, and Carriacou, right? And you're talking about each district has approximately 6 investigators. So just do the math. One person might have, but right now the caseload is cut to roughly about 40 cases, and that's just on average per person, right? And they usually would get cases on a weekly basis. So one might say the report is being made and nothing is done. One, manpower is an issue for us, and two, when things are done, you would not know because we would not come back to you and say X is being done or Y is being done to the case. Even though at times one might recommend that the child should be removed, but we have to work with the family. And to answer your question, yes, we get a lot of malicious reports, and our investigators are trained to do their bits and pieces to identify, what is genuine from what is not.
Well, let me just go back again. You said on average 20 per week per district?
Yes.
It
could be a little less at times, but
okay, on average, yeah? Because 20 per week is about 1,000 a year, also.
I didn't do the math, but I am telling you our caseloads are extremely heavy. It's extremely heavy.
Okay.
But one district, as I indicated, has different parishes within it. So
yes.
Let's say we get 15 cases, one person might get 7, depends on what parish you are in. Yeah, so one might get 7, one might get 3, within that 15 cases.
Okay. Let me ask another question. Truancy, children not attending school. How big a problem is that?
We do have issues with that, and so we would have to work jointly with the Ministry of Education to deal with those issues or to deal with those problems. And again, some persons they do not understand. I could recall not too long I had a conversation with a caller, but we have different mandates. And so sometimes we get referrals that does not specifically speak to CPA, but we will work the case jointly with the other entity, whether it be the Ministry of Social Development or the Ministry of Education. So whatever aspect that deals with child protection issue, we will deal with that. And whatever deals with whether it be social or truancy, we would have to do the referral.
Speaking to someone from another agency, they said to me that, well, as you know, we have a high incidence of single mothers, right? And the issue often arises as to maintenance by fathers. Yeah? And the person was saying that, boy, the problem is that the mothers complain about maintenance, the fathers complain about access. In your work, how is that dealt with? First of all, is that a big something that arises often? That complaint. The father saying, "Me again, I can't see my child, and until I could see my child, I not giving the mother any money because sometimes they say the money is not being spent on the child and so on, and the mother then saying, you not provide any maintenance, you not see the child." Basically, that. How do you deal with that kind of conflicted issue?
We do have some of those cases. It's not in the majority though. And it's basically a matter of custody between one parent to another. So again, what we would often do is work together with legal aid and counseling clinic to see how we can do some form of mediation for both parents. Because sometimes they don't understand the damage or the trauma that they are creating or causing or imposing on that child. And so sometimes we would have to bring them to reality or attempt or try to bring them so that they can see from the child's lens what is happening to that child and how things can be better if they co-parent. So we work together with another agency, and most of the time it's legal aid and counseling clinic.
The modern phenomenon of multi-parent families, by that I mean a mother having children for different fathers, yeah, and sometimes very young children. How has that complicated your work?
The first part of what you said, it broke up, so I didn't hear at all. So can you just repeat?
Yes, the modern occurrence of multi-parent families. By that I mean you find a mother having children, young children, sometimes for two different fathers, and so on. I'm asking if that has complicated your work in terms of dealing with issues of neglect, abuse, and so on. And those could be very difficult and sensitive issues. You have fathers who take the view that, listen, I'm going to maintain my child, but whatever money I give must only go for my child. Yeah? And some fathers will take the point that, listen, the other father can't discipline my child. Yeah? And children sometimes with their own wisdom and smartness, they know how to play one against the next, sometimes to get their own way. How you treat to that?
We do at times have those kind of cases. Again, it's not in the majority. And most of the times when you have those scenarios or those type of cases, you would see it's more than just fathers don't want to contribute towards his child or the other child within the home, but you would see other social factors come into play. And there again, you can see in those type of household, you would see children are more prevalent, are more exposed to being abused, right? Because it's because of the social ills that are existing within the home. But when it comes to the actual like maintenance, we work jointly with another entity because it does not fall directly in the line of Child Protection Authority. We would have to gain the assistance from another entity to work so that we can assist the children.
Lady Annade,
Yes, I will take this from a bit of a different angle because I do a lot of work with women themselves, because you're now going towards the women and lifestyle and cultural norms and, people accepting this behavior. And those of us who work especially with women, we know, and through your program and this opportunity for which we thank you, we have to remind women to really value themselves and to have self-worth, because very often they are living once again a life cycle of learned behavior. Many persons would have seen their mothers and sometimes their grandmothers before them doing exactly what you describe, and it becomes a continuous life cycle reality of their own lives. But I think it is very important for example, the Child Protection Authority in cases, and I'm sure they do, having previously been a part of this particular area. I I would urge Child Protection Authority, Ministry of Social Development, Legal Aid and Counseling, Community Relations departments, and any other, even civil society organizations, the churches, and wherever, to just work on women's own self confidence, self value, self worth, and there is another very important organization which sometimes due to financing and other problems would have been up and down, and that is our Family Planning Association. And I have decided more recently to lend my experience to the Caribbean Family Planning Association, because of working in country at all levels to do with children and women, to encourage women to practice spacing, child making, being responsible. It's not, of course, we cannot stop human behavior and human sexuality from being our reality. But if women are educated and they understand by whatever means they use, be it abstinence, be it contraception, sometimes just saying no to situations that would protect them from making more children, to have a reality like what we are discussing. We have to work with the behavioral change. And very interestingly, there was a man, while I'm thinking, oh, the women need to be more responsible, he, as part of this regional body of, family planning, he spoke to, and he speaks to men. Men also have to be responsible. So not because you have access to a lady who has a child and you may be having relations with that person, you all as men also have to take the responsibility of not just having a child irresponsibly for having another child's sake. You also have a role in being responsible through contraceptive means, through sometimes, not always, wanting to have sexual relations, but bonding in different ways if you genuinely care about these women. So this also must be part of any discussion we're having about maintenance, about these, what we call, when we do this kind of research and work, visiting relations. And it is very, very real in the Grenadian context. And we've been told that Grenadian women and men have been perhaps at times the least likely to get married or to have these set units, these family units in the Caribbean. And these are issues we have to ask why. And therefore, in asking why, we also have to work towards behavioral change, changing the norm. What is the normal way of doing business? So one woman sometimes could have 8 or 9 children, and sometimes 2 of them are from one gentleman, and so on. And the expectation, yes, indeed, and in fact, from all that we know on the ground, the expectation is that whoever is coming, gentleman number 2 or number 3, is expected to look after all of these children. And not only is it bringing trouble around the areas of maintenance, it is opening up the vulnerabilities of the children, because I've heard of situations where men will say, if I have to mind these children who are not mine, well, I have to have my way with these children as well, because I am looking after the mother and looking after children that are not mine. What am I getting in return? What is in it for me? And very often advantage is taken of these children, usually the girl children, but not only the girl children, as we are finding out. There's as equal amount of interference with the boy child in our society, but because we have now gone ahead to work towards protecting the girl child, and advocacy is very often about the girl child, and the girl child is encouraged to report, to tell someone, we are finding that our boy children are being interfered with by pedophiles and persons who are taking advantage of them in almost equal numbers. And sometimes we have been told through self-reporting in sometimes even higher numbers than the girl child. So this is what this discussion also brings to the table about maintenance and who's paying for whose child and not only their child and not the other children. This is leading to a lot of real life problems in our society right
Yeah.
here.
Although just a few days ago in a different forum, one researcher said that his research shows that the children per mother in Grenada has moved from about 7 in the 1950s to as low as 2 in 2010. You know, but the maybe now I don't know how that has affected, if at all, the multi-parenting. Because a woman might have 2 children, but sometimes men might still have 3, 4, as the case may be. And it's, I just want to shift a bit. And before we shift, I just want to recognize once again the sponsors of this program: Jail Professional Solutions, GEM FM out of Canada, carrying this program out of Canada, and Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, GTAL.
Attention all workers, your health and safety at work are critical. At Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, we are dedicated to ensuring you have a safe and secure work environment. If you encounter unsafe conditions or are involved in an accident, take immediate actions. Report it to the company, your shop steward, and make sure it reaches your union. Your health and safety is a priority, and a strong union means a strong voice for your rights. Don't wait. Address concerns right away and protect your well-being. For a safer workplace and a better quality of life, stand with the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. Together, we can create a safer, healthier work environment for everyone.
Yes, before I move to the next matter, I just want to point out, one person says children not going to school, especially on Fridays. Children are not going to school, especially on Fridays, to assist their parents in vending. That's one comment from one of the followers. I want to just shift to the issue of adoption. How prevalent is that in our society, these applications to adopt Grenadian children, A, and by people in Grenada and people overseas?
Just repeat for me again. You broke
Yes,
up.
Ms. John. Yes, indeed.
Right, I'm just asking for you to repeat. I didn't hear the beginning of the question.
The prevalence of adoption applications. Applications. How much of that we actually face in Grenada, have in Grenada?
We have quite a number of adoption cases in Grenada, actually, both locally and internationally. But it's more of a international base than that of a local base, but we do have a number of them locally as well. The process in itself for both is slightly different. Persons often go on the notion that you just come to the authority or maybe to the lawyers and just sign off a document, a paper, and automatically the child becomes yours. But it's a legal process. It's one that entails a lot of
You break it up a bit, or it's just John?
A lot of documents, original birth certificates, you have original marriage certificate if you are married, thorough blood work, you have references, bank statements. Also, we need to do our groundwork and do our of you just signing a document and automatically the child is yours. So you have to present a number of documents. It ranges from original birth certificate, original marriage certificate, police record, bank statement, references, thorough medical. It's a number of them. We have a checklist that we present to our applicants. After we collect all the documents, we also need to do groundwork on the applicants, right? Because it's not a matter of you submit that and whatever. We would have to do our groundwork. We would have to do our investigation on the applicants. There's something called a home study, and the home study would basically give us an insight as to who the applicant is or are. Depends on if it's husband and wife. It's something very detailed, something very thorough. It goes way back to when the applicant was a child, right up to the current day, right? We also would have to do our groundwork on the child. If the child is within state's care, we would have to have a custody order for that child in order for that child to be adoptable. If we don't have a custody order, then it could work another way where the parents would give their consent. And that is for local adoption, that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
We will do our reports in a nutshell, present it to the adoption committee. They view it and they agree with the documents that are presented. Then it goes on to the Child Protection Board, sorry. They too will take a second look at it. If they approve it, then they would give the notice of approval. That's a piece of document that is necessary for our the processing, the legal aspect of the adoption. So the applicant will take that note to their lawyer. The lawyer will file for a court date, and the judge basically would give the final seal. And even 1 year after the adoption, we will still have to do our monitoring to make sure that the child bonded, and all these things properly. In a nutshell, that's the process locally. For international adoption, it works similarly. However, though the parents might give their consent, we still would have to proceed with a custody order. And also we would have to work jointly with a Hague-approved adoption agency in the country in which the person resides. And that is necessary so that we can have a full understanding. They would need to do their investigation on the applicants so that we can have the relevant documentation down here to see whether or not that applicant is suited for whichever child that he or she is interested in adopting. In a nutshell, it's detailed, it's a lot of work, a lot of information, but basically in a nutshell, that's the process.
On average, how many adoptions we have per year?
On average, we could have roughly about, let's see, could be more than 20, but it depends, right? It could be more than 20, it depends. Because the adoption process is one that is so thorough, the investigation in itself would take some time, right? And so we have like 3 adoption officers, and we usually would try to do our adoption in batches. So let's say each adoption officer presents, let's say 2 files per sitting. So that will be like 6, and we have about, let's say, 4 sitting for the year, then it could be roughly about 20. But that's on average.
Okay, Lady Annade, I particularly want to hear you in terms of international adoptions, in particular in this era of human trafficking.
Yes, well, I actually would comment on this point indeed. I did have the honor to have been asked quite a few years ago now to be the chair of the adoption board of Grenada. And I remember serving on that board with some very, very distinguished persons, including the present Minister of Social Development, and persons who, of course, would have been high-ranking police officers. And it was really important. I'm saying that because everybody brought their own area of expertise on the ground and from their own backgrounds to the table. And at that time, there were more international adoptions. And we took it very seriously because there had been a history here in Grenada where there had been complaints, putting it at its lowest, of cases of child trafficking and human smuggling. We have literally had cases while I was Solicitor General. I met an ongoing case and I'm sure I left it and nothing much came of it in the end, because, for example, there had been a practice where persons would come, whether it was by plane and usually by sea, and they would be able to offer a parent some money. And there were stories of persons enabling them, being asked to locate a child for them, to take away with them. And in one case, there was a very famous one where a child was taken to the United States. And the mother did enable, with the assistance of somebody who had been approached by prospective parents, to help them find a Grenadian child, because they love the country, they love the people, and maybe the intentions were general. And then the mother changed her mind and wanted her child back. It had not been done correctly, but even though Grenada as a country tried their best to get back their citizen, I don't believe that ever happened, because the persons had good lawyers in America and so on. We heard a reference to a Hague adoption. That is really the Hague Convention to which Grenada signed on to, which provide the standards and the framework for ensuring that there are standard ways that Grenada must do these international adoptions. What we found a lot of were Grenadian family members wanting to assist their relatives, their children, their aunts, their uncles, their siblings, their cousins, to help perhaps make a better life, which I don't always agree with sometimes, that we're going for a better life. Sometimes we're happier right here where we're from, in the sunshine with the beaches and the simpler way of life. But many of us have bought into this better life, especially in North America, in America. So these Grenadian Americans in particular, and I think that remains the prevalence, would be the applicants. Now, where some of the difficulties would come about and remain in force, they would have to do a home study, where, as Mrs. Joseph-John said a little earlier, a home study would have to be carried out by a certified agency in the home country of the applicant, be it America, England, Canada, or wherever. And that agency would go in and then send back a report saying that these are suitable persons. But the adoption board, in this case now the Child Protection Authority Board, would have to review. Then sometimes there was a request to see whether, based on this application, there was really any truth that there was bonding between this applicant and this child, who may be a cousin, who may be a family member. Was there a genuine care? And this person, not just because they have the money in the bank to adopt a Grenadian child, did they have the love, the care, the empathy, the opportunity to provide the best kind of education for these children? So not only was an investigation carried out in the country of the adopting parent or parents, but right here in Grenada as well. And more research and investigations had to be done, of course, around the health of the child and whether this applicant had come to Grenada to spend some time with this child, whether there was any genuine bond, because you can't just pluck a child out of their environment, their school, away from their friends, and send them away with a stranger who has no idea either way who each of them are. So, there's a lot involved. And like I said, we have had and investigated cases of child trafficking, persons pretending to be going with the child for legitimate purposes, and we're hearing that the child is dancing in brothels in feathers and so on. Yes, these are realities that, as Grenadian boards and authorities, we have had to investigate with respect to international adoptions and custody and care and guardianship of children, being Grenadian children, being taken to the better life.
I must say that the implementation, right, so I must say that the implementation of the Hague Convention had curbed a lot of the children or human trafficking. And it also aided, well, in times prior, persons could have wanted to adopt a relative because they wanted to give them a better life. However, in today's days, it's one that is somewhat different because of those stipulations, those laws, the treaty. It makes it a bit difficult to just adopt a child internationally. So what they're basically saying, in order for a child to be adoptable, that child must be classed as an orphan, right? And there are different categories as an orphan, basically. So it could either be both parents of the child are deceased, or maybe one is alive, one deceased, and we would have to prove that the one that is alive is poverty stricken, below minimum wage, doesn't have any form of support, those things. We would have to prove that that parent is incapable of caring for that child. Or if both parents are alive, we also would have to prove that they are incapable. Another key factor is if the birth father's name is on the birth certificate, that is something that they always take into consideration. And if he can be located, if he's capable of caring for the child, they would also look at that. So there's a number of different factors. So if the child is a ward of the state, then that child can be classed as an orphan. So there are a lot of laws that are set up now that would hinder a child from just being adopted like that. The laws are basically structured in a way to protect the child.
Okay. Someone is asking, Mr. John, does your agency get involved with DNA testing from either parent of children?
So at times we do have to do DNA testing, right? And when I say we have cases where a mother would come and that child has sometimes 3 fathers, right? And in order for us to know who the father of the child is, then a DNA test would have to be completed. We would assist them in the process of getting the DNA test completed, but the actual payment of the DNA test would have to come from the applicants. We don't facilitate the actual payment, but we would walk through the whole process. We would be of support to them.
Okay, Mrs. John, I know you are responsible. You are the supervisor of alternative care. So my question is, how does alternative care relate to adoption? Is adoption
right? So at the beginning of the program, at the beginning of the program, I spoke about the different sections that the Child Protection Authority basically have, right? So we have investigation, we have family support, we have alternative care, we have courts. Whenever a case is being investigated and we see for a fact that the parents are not working for the betterment of the child, eventually we'd have to do removal. Again, as I said, we would look to family members for assistance. If not, then and only then that child will be placed in a residential or foster care placement, right? Even then, while that child is within state care, we will try our best to work with the parents, again, giving them an opportunity to do what is right for themselves and also for the child in question. If the parents still continue on a path that is not conducive for the child, then and only then we would have to file for a custody order, right? Because most of the times, that parent will not consent to the adoption of their child. Though they are not, sometimes you have contact visits, they are not showing up to contact visits. They're not calling, though they are encouraged, you see that they show little to no interest in the child, all of these things. But yet they prefer, some of them will tell you, they prefer the child remain in care until they reach 18. And that is so sad. So then and only then we would have to have. Pardon?
No, you were saying they prefer the child to remain in care until what?
Until they're 18, until that child is 18 years.
Okay, good. Okay.
Some
when
of
the
them
child
will
is
tell you
18
that,
there.
which
They make their own
transferred to the
decision.
child. Right. Then and only then we would resort to permanent placement for that child through the obtaining of a custody order. So when we obtain that custody order, then we would have that child on our list. We would do our vetting, and we will match the child accordingly to an applicant for adoption.
Right. It could be adoption or foster care.
No, at that point, the child would have already been in foster care
In
or
foster care.
residential care.
I follow.
Right?
I follow.
Right. But in terms of permanency for that child, because
Yes, yes.
it is not wise or it's not in the child's best interest to remain in care until 18. So it's then and only then we would seek permanent placement for that child.
Now, something I have come across is parents of children, Caribbean children in North America. They often complain that the state, some say racism is involved, I don't know. But they often complain that the state is almost setting up or creating a divide between they as parents and their children. By the state almost inciting the children sometimes to report on the parents, to complain when Caribbean people use letters of discipline, to bring complaints about that, and then that is seen as abuse, seen as a basis for taking away the children and all of that. Yeah? And I've heard persons express concern about that culture being brought into Grenada and the Caribbean. I don't know if you want to comment on that, because it is a difficult issue. I think you
I think most of the time.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Jones.
Yes, I think most of the times persons are misinformed. And then again, too, CPA has not been out there enough to educate the public as to what our mandates are, right? Right, to inform the public as to what our mandates are.
Yes.
Breaking up a bit.
Yes, she is.
I would comment. I saw
Are you hearing me now?
indeed. And I just want
Are
to
you hearing
say,
Yes, we'll come back to you in a minute, Mrs. John.
thank you. I thought you,
Yes,
yes, no, thank
Okay.
you. So, in reviewing the legislation and working in the areas, looking at television shows of distressed parents over the years who can't seem to understand why. Sometimes they are in denial, we accept, but in many cases, they don't understand. And I'm going to use a bit of a fancy word and try to break it down a bit. The nuances of the law, all of these shadows and areas of the law that the average man or woman, Grenadian man or woman, cannot understand. And I know that while more active with the Grenada National Coalition on the Rights of the Child, we had advocated, and it had been recommended by the UN Committee for the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, that there be a children's ombudsman, just like the ombudsman that exists now, the ombudsman's office that exists now to deal with the rights of public officers and disciplining them and also listening to their side of the story and so on. The recommendation had been for a children's ombudsman. And if there is such an office, that perhaps these child rights advocates, some persons have gone a little too quiet, and many things have caused this, but we wouldn't get into that right now. But if that office comes into play, and I know that Grenada has to go back in short order, hopefully, to Geneva, where they normally would make a report, and I had the good fortune many years ago to represent the shadow report of the civil society to this committee at the United Nations in Geneva, representing children and their views and so on. But I believe that there should be a publicly funded or appointed lawyer or lawyers who can help to be mediators, who can help to fill the gap of explaining to parents who, under the act, under the law, also have their rights. But very often, because they might be simple persons, meaning they may come from rural areas and not have had the kind of education, they may not have the kinds of money required to hire the top flight lawyers in St. George's and so on and so on. They are also usually in distress and besides themselves with grief and guilt and every adjective of emotion that you can describe when children are removed from them. But these people really and truly should have the right to good legal counsel to help them through these situations. And if this were the case, and I believe they have a right to such legal counsel against the state, if this were the case, I believe that in many cases, we would not have to move to adoption, but we would be moving more towards mediated situations where persons are counseled better, and perhaps the children can be reunited rather than having to be adopted, and in some cases adopted out of our country where we have such a small pool of citizens in the first place that the number of which cannot even develop or be productive enough towards the development, the practical economic development of our state. These are developmental issues. So I am advocating here, as much as and as passionately as I advocate for the rights and best interests of children being paramount, in my view, to all rights, I think that there should be other buffers within our legal structures, within our administrative structures, for child protection and welfare, to ensure that parents and guardians and other persons would fare perhaps more justly and fairly within the legal system if they had legal representation provided to them by the state. And I say this after a review not only of the laws, but a review of the cases where sometimes these distressed parents try to get to the court, and it is usually in such a rush, and sometimes they are represented by lawyers who really and truly may take their fees but are not really versed in this particular specialized area of the law, and they usually do not do very well. They do not fare very well, and most times we would see the judgments of those cases indicating that the parents, the guardians, they would lose all rights to these children. And they become so despondent that even though sometimes they have a right to reapply or to appeal, they don't have the means, they are too distressed, they give up, and these children are not only lost to the families, but by a process of adoption can be lost to the country. So I think we need to revisit perhaps a little more how we can try to be a little more mediatory, a little more conscious of trying to, through counseling and assistance, try to reunite families. And I heard earlier that Mrs. Joseph-John said that sometimes you try to get the child to a family member. So as far as humanly possible, maybe even within the community from where they're from, you get somebody through, of course, or with the support of this authority to ensure that this child is not totally removed from everything and everyone that they know and who would have loved them or who continue to love them.
Great. Okay,
it's a good suggestion.
Sorry, go ahead, Ms. Young.
No, I was saying it's a good suggestion, but I just want to reiterate, adoption is always the very last resort. We would have to work with the families before, because we have to present to the court something called a care plan. And in the care plan, we would have to outline what have we done to help the family before we turn to adoption, right? We would have to outline that. And so we would have to use all our options before we could turn to adoption. Just want to reiterate.
I'm
Yes, I just
urging
wanna-
the highest threshold, even to our judicial officers, the highest threshold, because, and especially to do with international adoptions.
Yeah.
Because as I'm saying, we have approximately 177,000 to 115,000, I believe that the more recent census would tell us. And we need every Grenadian to be in Grenada as far as possible towards ensuring our national development. So I hear and I understand, and as I said, I've been part of the system. I've been on an adoption board. I've done adoptions. But to me, still, I think that we must adopt the highest possible threshold within our capacities, whatever they may be, even at the level of the judiciary.
Yes. Before we end, I just want to recognize the sponsors of this program once again: GEL Professional Solutions, Jim FM out of Canada, and Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union.
Attention all workers, your health and safety at work are critical. At Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, we are dedicated to ensuring you have a safe and secure work environment. If you encounter unsafe conditions or are involved in an accident, take immediate actions. Report it to the company, your shop steward, and make sure it reaches your union. Your health and safety is a priority, and a strong union means a strong voice for your rights. Don't wait. Address concerns right away and protect your well-being. For a safer workplace and a better quality of life, stand with the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. Together, we can create a safer, healthier work environment for everyone.
Mr. John, closing remarks?
I just want to
Mrs.
thank
John?
you so very much for giving us, the opportunity. Yes, are you hearing me?
Yes, we heard you.
Right. I'm saying that I thank you. Right. I just want to say how thankful I am for giving us the opportunity, for the public to know what's happening, what the Child Protection Authority is about. Because most of the times, if not all of the times, persons have their own perception as to, what Child Protection Authority is about. And so I thank you. And we are looking forward to more programs like this. Also, from the alternative care units, I always like to take the opportunity when I'm given to make a plea out there. We have a foster care system as stated, and we would like to have more foster carers by our side. We have over 200 children within our system, and we are looking for foster carers. It is always best that children be placed within a family setting than residential homes. And so if anybody within the viewers are interested in being a foster carer, you can always contact us on 435-0293. That's 435-0293. And we can have a discussion and we can give you further information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lady Trotman-Joseph?
Yes, thank you very much for affording me the opportunity to sit here with somebody else who is also an advocate. And I'm saying that for child rights. And I'm saying that because very often we seeing a dwindling number of persons volunteering their time, their empathy, their sharing, even the time to march on the ground for these children who are the most vulnerable, as I said before, the most voiceless in our society and most in need of us becoming and truly forming ourselves into a community for action to ensure that they can thrive and express themselves and really grow up to not only be productive citizens of Grenada, but grow up to live the good life, to live better lives than perhaps their own parents and grandparents did. I take this opportunity to also say that we need to make a plug for persons who are working in this area of psychosocial support, this area of child protection and welfare and well-being, because very often they're disregarded, they're underpaid. We're hearing that there's a shortage, there are not enough persons to do what has to be done in all of the districts. And we know that, yes, there are districts, but we know from experience that there are hotspots. There are some districts that are really and truly having more problems in these areas: the truancy, the child sexual abuse, the lifestyle, the physical abuse, all types of abuse of children in every way. And we need our authorities, our government, every one of them, as they occur and reoccur, to pay attention to this area, because very often, if you want to look at the level of development and civilization of a nation, you look at how that nation and its people treat their children. And that is a very good indication of what and who we are as a people. So I urge the investments, the necessary investments in people, in our development. It's not always about a road or a school or whatever, but it is really the development of our human beings. And I take a life cycle approach by saying it starts with childhood. It starts from zero, from birth. And once we pay attention from the beginning, we will have a wonderful, happy society with less crime. And who knows, we as Grenadians may yet be in the top 10 of the happy nations of the world if we start caring and loving and guarding and protecting the well-being of the children of this nation. And as we are in Child Month, I speak for the voiceless child who cannot perhaps be on this program to say, through the theme of Child Month, I am a child, I am your priority. This is generally the theme, to make our children our priority, not only in October, but in every month of the year. And once we do that, whether we're parents, we're aunts, we ourselves have been children, and we know the importance of us being given the priority as human beings. But when we were children, likewise, now we may be parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, teachers. Let us give our children the priority so that indeed we can thrive as a people.
Well said. Thank you so much, Lady Trotman-Joseph. Thank you so much, Mr. Joseph-John. Thank you to the CPA, that's your leaders at the CPA who accepted the invitation very willingly to have someone appear in this program, and you did a great job. Thanks to those who follow the program. Good night. We'll be back next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Thank you.